My name is Darren, a 32-year-old architect from Boston with a story that's been eating me alive. Last weekend, I attended my sister Abigail's picture-perfect wedding after years of estrangement from my family. During the post-wedding dinner, my mother raised her champagne glass eyes gleaming. "Your sister's wedding was perfect," she beamed. "When will it be your turn?" I smiled calmly and replied, "It already happened. You just weren't there." The whole room froze. Before I tell you how I ended up dropping this bombshell at my sister's post-wedding dinner, let me know where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button to join me on this journey of family secrets and hard-earned self-respect. I grew up in a wealthy Connecticut suburb where appearance mattered more than authenticity. Our sprawling colonial home with its manicured lawn and white picket fence perfectly disguised the emotional dynamics festering inside. From my earliest memories, the roles were clearly defined. My sister Abigail was the golden child, and I was the black sheep. Our parents Thomas and Barbara Wilson were pillars of the community. Dad, a prominent corporate attorney, Mom, the perfect socialite housewife who chaired every committee at the country club. They had an image to maintain, and somehow I never quite fit into that image, while Abigail slotted in perfectly. The contrast in how they treated us was subtle at first, then painfully obvious as we grew older. When Abigail brought home straight A's in elementary school, my parents would throw elaborate celebration dinners, invite the grandparents, and shower her with gifts. A new bike, the latest electronic gadget, or designer clothes. When I achieved the same academic success the following semester, I received a quick, "Good job, son," from my father without looking up from his newspaper, and perhaps a distracted pat on the shoulder from Mom on her way to plan Abigail's next achievement party. One memory still burns particularly sharp. When I was 16, I won a state-level architecture competition with my innovative design for sustainable urban housing. The awards ceremony was scheduled on a Saturday afternoon, and I had been reminding my parents for weeks. The morning of the event, I came downstairs in my best clothes to find my parents dressed to go out, not to my ceremony, but to Abigail's dance recital, which had been suddenly rescheduled. "I'm sure you understand, Darren," my mother said, adjusting her pearl earrings. "This is Abigail's final recital before regionals. We can't miss it. You can take the bus to your thing, right? Just bring home whatever certificate they give you." My thing was the culmination of 6 months of work, the validation of my passion, and potentially a pathway to college scholarships. But none of that mattered when weighed against Abigail's dance routine. I took the bus, accepted my first-place award to applause that echoed hollowly without family there to share it, and brought home not just a certificate, but a substantial scholarship check and an offer for a summer internship at a CAMUS, prestigious architecture firm. When I showed these to my parents that evening, my father glanced at them and said, "Architecture is a risky career, Darren. You should be focusing on something practical like law. Look how well it's served our family." Then he turned back to fawning over the video of Abigail's performance. My mother was more subtly undermining. She'd say things like, "It's nice that you're good at drawing, sweetie, but is that really going to give you the kind of life you want? Or Abigail has such clear direction with her pre-law focus. Maybe you should talk to her about how she plans her future." As the years passed, I retreated more and more into my designs and drawings. My bedroom became my sanctuary, walls covered with sketches and blueprints, drafting table positioned by the window for natural light. While Abigail was being paraded around at country club events and family gatherings as the future legal star, I was developing my own vision, determination hardening within me to succeed, despite rather than because of my family. When college application time arrived, I applied to MIT for architecture against my father's explicit wishes that I follow the family tradition at Yale Law. When I was accepted with a significant scholarship, thanks in part to that state competition, my parents' reaction was tepid at best. "MIT Island." "Fine," my father said with obvious disappointment, "though I've already spoken to several of my Yale contacts about you." "We're just concerned about your future stability," my mother added. "Abigail has such a clear path ahead at Yale Law." The contrast became even starker when Abigail was accepted to Yale Law 2 years later. My parents threw an extravagant party, invited all their social connections, and my father proudly gave a speech about continuing the Wilson legal legacy. For my MIT acceptance, We had a quiet family dinner where the conversation quickly turned to Abigail's upcoming debate tournament. The college years only widened the gulf. While I was studying architecture at MIT, pushing boundaries with sustainable designs that earned recognition from faculty, my parents remained fixated on Abigail's progress through Yale Law. Phone calls home inevitably included questions about whether I was considering transferring to a more practical program, followed by 15 minutes of updates about Abigail's latest accomplishments. I found my tribe at MIT, other creative-driven individuals who valued innovation and weren't bound by rigid social expectations. For the first time, I experienced what it felt like to be valued for exactly who I was, not constantly measured against someone else's yardstick. Graduation day brought the pattern into painful clarity. My parents attended, of course. Appearances mattered. But they arrived late, left early to beat traffic, and took exactly 2 photos. When I introduced them to my favorite professor, who had mentored me through award-winning projects, they made polite small talk for exactly 90 seconds before my mother checked her watch and mentioned they needed to get home to prepare for Abigail's law school graduation the following weekend. For Abigail's Yale Law graduation, they rented out an entire restaurant for the celebration, flew in relatives from across the country, and presented her with a brand new luxury car with a big red bow. I received a check that wouldn't cover even 1 month's rent in Boston, where I'd accepted a position at a competitive architecture firm. "It's not that we're not proud," my mother said, "but Abigail's accomplishment is the culmination of a family tradition. You chose a different path." That different path led me to Boston, where I established not just physical distance, but emotional boundaries with my family. I threw myself into my work believing naively that if I could just achieve enough professional success, my parents would finally see me as worthy of the same pride and attention they lavished on Abigail. Looking back now, I realize I was still seeking their validation, still believing I could earn their respect if I just accomplished enough. It would take years and a different kind of love altogether for me to understand that some voids can't be filled by achievement, and some approval will never come no matter how deserving you might be. My early career in Boston was a baptism by fire. I'd landed a position at Henley and Associates, a cutthroat architecture firm known for innovative designs and brutal work culture. 18-hour days were the norm, not the exception. Competition among junior architects was fierce, with everyone fighting for a chance to contribute meaningfully to major projects rather than just drafting bathroom details and stairwells. 6 months, in exhausted and questioning my choices, I was assigned to a renovation project for a historic library building. That's when Marcus entered my life quite literally through the conference room door 15 minutes late to our first project meeting. "Sorry for the delay," he said, sliding into the chair beside me. Structural assessment on the north wing took longer than expected. Marcus James was the structural engineer assigned to the project, brilliant, confident, with a dry sense of humor that made even the most tedious planning meetings bearable. Our professional relationship began with terse exchanges about load-bearing capacities and foundation reinforcements. I found him frustratingly meticulous, questioning aspects of my designs that I thought were perfectly sound. In retrospect, he was right about most of those concerns, though it took me weeks to admit it. The turning point came late one night when we were both working overtime trying to resolve an issue with the library's century-old dome that was compromising both historical integrity and safety codes. "Your design is beautiful, Darren," he said, studying my latest revision, "but it won't stand up to a New England winter without additional support here and here." He pointed to specific areas, explaining structural principles I'd overlooked in my aesthetic focus. Instead of being defensive, something shifted in me. I asked questions. He explained patiently. We ordered takeout and worked until 3 in the morning, eventually creating a solution that preserved my design vision while meeting his structural requirements. After that night, our collaboration deepened into friendship. We began meeting outside of work, museum exhibitions, on architectural history, discussions over coffee, about our favorite buildings around the world, debates about whether Gaudí or Wright had more lasting influence. I can't pinpoint exactly when friendship evolved into something more. Perhaps it was the night Marcus took me to see a retrospective on Japanese temple architecture, and I realized he'd remembered an offhand comment I'd made weeks earlier about my fascination with those structures. Perhaps it was when he sketched a concept for a treehouse observatory on a napkin at dinner, designed specifically around interests I'd shared with him. What I do know is that falling in love with Marcus felt like finding a missing structural element in my own life design, something that had always been absent but whose shape I couldn't quite define until it was there, making everything more stable, more purposeful. The irony wasn't lost on me that while I was finally finding profound connection and acceptance, I was simultaneously avoiding sharing this significant part of my life with my family. Not primarily because Marcus was a man, though I had no illusions about my conservative parents' likely reaction to that, but because years of emotional neglect had conditioned me to believe that nothing important to me would ever be important to them. I made half-hearted attempts during holiday visits home. I've met someone special. I began during Thanksgiving dinner, only to have my mother interrupt with, "Did you hear Abigail's been selected for a prestigious clerkship? Tell everyone the news, Abby." At Christmas I tried again. "There's someone important in my life. I'd like you to meet sometime." My father barely looked up from carving the turkey. "That's nice, son. Speaking of important people, my golf partner Judge Sullivan might have an opening in his firm if you're finally ready to consider law." Meanwhile, my relationship with Marcus deepened. I met his family during a weekend trip to Chicago. His mother Ruth, a retired literature professor. His father David, an engineer like Marcus. His younger sister Grace, a pediatrician. They welcomed me immediately and authentically, asking questions about my work, my interests, my dreams, questions my own family had never bothered to ask. "Tell us more about that sustainable housing project you're working on," Ruth urged during dinner. "The concept sounds fascinating." "I'd love to see some of your designs," David added. "Marcus says you have an exceptional eye for blending functionality with beauty." The contrast between holiday celebrations became increasingly stark. With my family, gatherings were formal, appearance-focused affairs where conversations never delved beneath surface pleasantries and Abigail's latest achievements. With Marcus's family, holidays were warm, sometimes chaotic events, filled with genuine interest in each other's lives, heated but good-natured debates about everything from politics to the best way to cook a turkey, and an underlying current of unconditional acceptance. After 2 years together during a research trip to Japan, where we were both studying traditional architectural techniques, Marcus proposed. We were standing in a 17th-century garden in Kyoto, the interplay of natural and designed elements creating perfect harmony around us. "I want to build a life with you," he said, simply holding out a platinum band. "Something as beautiful and enduring as this garden, but uniquely ours." The joy of that moment was shadowed only by the decision I now faced whether to invite my family to our wedding. Marcus, ever supportive, left it entirely up to me. "They're your family," he said. "If you want them there, we'll make it work. If you don't, I understand completely." I made one final attempt at connection during a dinner visit home. I told them about Marcus, about our engagement, about our plans for a fall wedding. Their reaction was exactly what I'd feared. My mother's tight smile, my father's frown, the immediate change of subject to Abigail's recent court victory. As we left that night, my mother pulled me aside. "Darren, you've always been different. But this lifestyle choice, it's not something we can support or celebrate. I hope you understand why we wouldn't be comfortable attending such an event." The pain of that rejection was acute, but strangely clarifying. Driving back to Boston that night, I realized I was finally free from the burden of seeking their approval. Marcus and I would plan our wedding surrounded only by people who truly loved and supported us. His family, our friends, our chosen community. "I'm sorry they won't be there," Marcus said, holding my hand as we drove through the night. "I'm not," I replied, surprised to discover it was true. Our wedding should be filled with love, not judgment. They've made their choice, and I'm making mine. The final attempt to include my family came 2 months before the wedding. I called on a Sunday afternoon, catching my mother between her garden club meeting and dinner preparations. "Mom, I'm calling about the wedding invitations," I began. "We're finalizing the guest list and I wanted to—" "Oh, Darren," she interrupted, voice tight. "I was just about to call Abigail about her clerkship interview. Did you hear she's being considered for Judge Harmon's office? It's quite prestigious. I pressed on. That's great for Abigail. But about the wedding, Darren, your father and I have been very clear about our position. We can't support this arrangement. It goes against everything we believe. Her voice dropped to a whisper, as though neighbors might overhear through the phone. Have you considered that this phase might pass if you don't rush into anything? The familiar pain stabbed through me, but it was duller now expected. It's not a phase, Mom. Marcus and I are getting married in October. I'm sending you an invitation. You and Dad can decide whether family means enough to attend. There was a long silence before she replied, I need to start dinner now. Give my regards to your friend. That conversation solidified what I'd already known in my heart. Our wedding would proceed without my birth family present. The realization was both liberating and painful, like lancing a long-festering wound. The infection of hope, that somehow they would change, that they would finally see and accept me, drained away, leaving room for healthier expectations to grow. We chose the Bowditch Modern Museum for our venue, a striking glass and steel structure I had admired since my first year in Boston. With its soaring ceilings and walls of windows overlooking the harbor, it embodied the perfect marriage of aesthetic beauty and architectural precision, much like what Marcus and I hoped to build in our life together. The October day dawned clear and crisp, fall foliage at its peak, the harbor water reflecting a brilliant blue sky. The ceremony space featured minimalist white chairs arranged in a semicircle rather than traditional straight rows, symbolizing the community gathering around us rather than dividing into sides. Marcus's father, David, helped me with my tie in the preparation room, his hands steady and sure. I'm proud to be gaining you as a son-in-law, he said, eyes crinkling with genuine emotion. The way you see the world, the spaces you create, you've brought new dimensions into our family's life. Those simple words, the paternal pride and acceptance I'd craved my entire life, nearly undid me. I hugged him, unable to speak for a moment. He seemed to understand, patting my back gently before stepping away to discreetly wipe his own eyes. The ceremony itself was everything we'd hoped for, intimate, meaningful, focused on our commitment rather than tradition for tradition's sake. 60 of our closest friends and Marcus's family witnessed our vows, which we had written ourselves. My college roommate Thomas stood as my best man, while Marcus's sister Grace served as his best woman. There was a poignant moment during David's speech at the reception when he referenced family. Today our family doesn't just gain a son-in-law, he said, raising his glass. Darren, you become our son, our brother, part of the tapestry of our lives going forward. You have always had and will always have a place at our table, in our homes and in our hearts. The contrast between this wholehearted welcome and my own parents' rejection created a complex emotional undertow beneath my joy. I felt simultaneously embraced and abandoned, celebrated and rejected. Looking around at the faces of those who had chosen to be there, friends who had supported my journey, colleagues who respected my work, Marcus's family who had embraced me without reservation, I realized I was experiencing the true meaning of family for perhaps the first time. Marcus and I spent 2 weeks in Scandinavia for our honeymoon, touring architectural landmarks from ancient wooden stave churches to cutting-edge contemporary buildings. We sketched and photographed, discussed and debated, each of us seeing details the other might have missed. Beyond the professional stimulation, there was a deeper joy in simply being together, building memories in beautiful spaces, planning our future projects and dreams. Upon returning to Boston, we began the next phase of our life together, buying and renovating a historic brownstone in the South End. The process was both challenging and rewarding our complementary skills, creating something neither of us could have achieved alone. Marcus's structural expertise ensured the 200-year-old building was sound and safe, while my design vision transformed cramped Victorian rooms into flowing modern spaces that still honored the home's history. Our professional lives flourished in parallel. I was promoted to senior architect at my firm while Marcus established his own structural engineering consultancy. We began collaborating on projects that garnered attention for their innovative blending of aesthetic beauty and structural integrity, first locally, then nationally. A sustainable mixed-use development we designed for a formerly industrial neighborhood won an American Architecture Award, establishing our professional reputation as a team. Yet amid this professional and personal fulfillment, there remained painful reminders of my family's absence. The first Thanksgiving after our wedding, I found myself staring at my phone thumb hovering over my mother's contact information before ultimately putting it away. Our first Christmas, as a married couple, we received cards from everyone except my parents and sister. Each birthday, each milestone passed without acknowledgement. 6 months after our wedding, I made one final attempt at connection. I had a leather-bound album created with our wedding photos. Nothing overtly romantic, just beautiful images of the ceremony, the venue, the celebration. I included a handwritten note, "Dear Mom and Dad, these are moments from one of the happiest days of my life. I wish you could have been there to share it. My door remains open if you ever wish to be part of my life again. Love always, Darren." I sent it certified mail to ensure it wouldn't be lost. 3 weeks later, it was returned, unopened, marked simply, "Refused." That box sitting on our front step containing rejected memories and an unanswered olive branch became the final breaking point. That evening, I built a fire in our newly renovated living room fireplace. Marcus sat quietly beside me as I placed the unopened package in the flames, watching as the cardboard blackened and curled, eventually revealing glimpses of the photographs inside, as they too were consumed. "I'm done," I said finally. "No more attempts, no more hope, no more disappointment." Marcus squeezed my hand. Sometimes the family we're born into isn't the family we're meant to have. As the last embers of the package faded to ash, I felt something shift inside me. Not healing exactly, not yet, but the beginning of acceptance. The space my birth family had occupied in my emotional landscape began to transform from an active wound into a scar, still present, still marking me, but no longer bleeding with each touch. 3 years passed with no contact from my family. Marcus and I built our life together, advancing our careers, traveling, establishing routines and traditions that were uniquely ours. We hosted dinner parties for friends, spent holidays with Marcus's family, celebrated professional achievements, and supported each other through occasional setbacks. It wasn't a perfect life. No authentic life is. But it was genuine, connected, and deeply satisfying in ways I had never experienced growing up. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday in April. I almost missed it among the usual stack of bills and advertisements. Heavy cream-colored paper gold embossed lettering the return address from my parents' home in Connecticut. "Miss Abigail Elizabeth Wilson and Mr. James Alexander Montgomery request the honor of your presence at their wedding celebration." My hands trembled slightly as I read through the formal wording, noting the extravagant details. Ceremony at St. Thomas Episcopal Church, reception at the Westfield Country Club, black tie attire required. So perfectly aligned with the image my parents had always cultivated. But it was the handwritten note folded inside that truly shocked me. "Darren, I know it's been a long time. Too long. I miss my brother. I'd really like you to be at my wedding if you can find it in your heart to come. There's a lot I want to say to you in person. Love, Abigail. P.S. Mom and Dad don't know I'm sending this. I've reserved you a spot regardless." I sat on our kitchen stool for nearly an hour, staring at that note, emotions cycling through me like weather systems: surprise, anger, curiosity, longing, resentment, and beneath it all, a stubborn kernel of familial love that refused to be extinguished despite years of neglect. When Marcus came home, I wordlessly handed him the invitation. He read it carefully, then looked at me with those eyes that always seemed to see straight to my core. "What are you thinking?" he asked simply. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to throw it away and pretend it never came. Part of me is curious. Part of me still cares about Abigail despite everything." Marcus nodded. "Those are all valid reactions. You don't have to decide tonight." But the invitation nagged at me through dinner, through our evening routine, into the darkness as we lay in bed. "I think I need to talk to her," I finally said. Not necessarily to attend, but to at least understand why now, after all this time. The next day I called the number Abigail had included in her note. She answered on the second ring, her voice instantly familiar yet somehow different, less certain than I remembered. "Darren, is it really you?" The genuine emotion in her voice caught me off guard. "Hello, Abigail. I said, striving to keep my tone neutral. "I received your wedding invitation." What followed was the most honest conversation we'd had in perhaps our entire lives. Abigail apologized for her role in the family dynamics, for accepting preferential treatment without questioning it, for not standing up for me when our parents dismissed my achievements and life choices. "I was selfish," she admitted. "It was easier to accept being the favorite than to question why they treated you differently. I'm not proud of that." When I asked why she was reaching out now, her answer surprised me. "James, my fiancé, he helped me see things differently. When I told him about you, about our family situation, he was genuinely appalled. He asked questions that made me uncomfortable, made me see our parents' behavior through outside eyes for the first time. And Mom and Dad, they don't know you're inviting me." There was a pause before she answered. "No, they still have their views. I'm hoping that seeing you again, perhaps meeting Marcus, might help change their perspective. But I won't lie to you. It won't be easy." Then came the request that felt like a punch to the stomach. "I was hoping maybe you could come alone just for the ceremony and dinner, just to avoid complications with Mom and Dad. Then maybe later we could arrange—" "Avoid complications," I interrupted. "You mean hide my husband, pretend my marriage doesn't exist to make our parents comfortable?" I'm sorry, she backpedaled quickly. "That was wrong of me to ask. Of course Marcus is welcome. I'm trying to navigate this the best I can." After we hung up, I paced our living room, conflicted and frustrated. Marcus listened patiently to my ranting, offering neither advice nor judgment, simply providing space for me to process. "What would you do?" I finally asked him. "I think you should go," he said thoughtfully. "Not for your parents, not even primarily for Abigail, but for yourself. For closure, for the chance to stand in that space as the person you truly are, not the person they wanted you to be." His wisdom, as usual, cut through my confusion. "Will you come with me?" "If you want me there, wild horses couldn't keep me away," he replied with a smile. "If you need to go alone, I'll support that too." In the end, I decided to attend, but on my own terms. I would wear my wedding ring proudly. I would bring photos of our life together on my phone. I would answer questions honestly if asked. I would not hide who I was or whom I loved, but I would also not deliberately create confrontation. I purchased an expensive suit, selected a crystal vase from Abigail's registry, and crafted a card with careful, measured words of congratulation. The night before we were to drive to Connecticut, I lay awake thinking about the family home I hadn't seen in 3 years, wondering if my old bedroom still existed or if it had been converted to some other purpose, a physical manifestation of my erasure from family history. The drive from Boston to Greenwich was just under 3 hours, but it felt like traveling back in time. Each mile marker seemed to peel away a layer of the independent adult life I'd built, revealing beneath it the insecure, approval-seeking boy I'd once been. By the time we pulled into the hotel parking lot, I felt both fortified by Marcus's reassuring presence beside me and terrified of reverting to old patterns in my family's presence. "Remember who you are now," Marcus said, squeezing my hand before we parted ways. He to explore the town while I attended the pre-wedding dinner alone, a compromise I'd suggested. "Not who they expect you to be." With those words echoing in my mind, I drove the familiar route to my parents' house, where the rehearsal dinner would be held in their impeccably landscaped backyard. The massive colonial looked exactly as I remembered, imposing perfect cold. I sat in the car for several minutes, gathering my courage before finally walking up the flagstone path to the front door I had once called home. The front door opened before I could ring the bell. My mother stood there looking barely aged from my memory, hair perfectly colored and styled makeup, flawless designer dress immaculate. For a moment we simply stared at each other, the weight of 3 years of silence hanging between us. "Darren," she finally said, her voice formal, as though greeting a distant acquaintance rather than her son. "You came." "Abigail invited me," I replied, simply, neither offering a hug nor extending my hand. "Yes, well," she glanced over her shoulder, then lowered her voice. "We should be clear before you join the others. Your father and I expect discretion tonight. This is Abigail's moment, and we won't have it overshadowed by controversial topics." The old familiar pain flared, but I was prepared for it now. "I'm here to celebrate Abigail's engagement, not to discuss my life. but I won't lie if asked direct questions. She pressed her lips together, then stepped aside to let me enter. The house smelled the same, lemon polish, fresh flowers, and the lingering scent of my mother's signature perfume. We walked in strained silence through the foyer into the backyard where approximately 30 people were gathered on the patio and manicured lawn. My father stood near the bar talking with a group of men I recognized as his law partners. When he spotted me, his expression flickered briefly with something unreadable before settling into a neutral mask. He excused himself from his conversation and approached, offering a stiff handshake. "Darren, didn't think you'd make it." His eyes dropped briefly to my left hand, where my wedding band gleamed in the early evening light, but he made no comment. "I wouldn't miss Abigail's wedding," I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. He nodded once, then quickly changed the subject to a safe topic. "The firm's expanded since you were last here. Added 3 new partners, opened an office in Hartford." Before I could respond, a familiar voice called my name. Abigail hurried across the lawn, looking radiant in a simple white dress, her expression openly joyful. Unlike our parents, she threw her arms around me in a genuine embrace. "You actually came. I was so afraid you wouldn't." She pulled back, studying my face. "You look great, Darren. Really great." "So do you," I said, meaning it. There was a glow about her that went beyond bridal excitement. She seemed more authentic, somehow less perfectly polished than I remembered. "Come meet James," she insisted, taking my hand and pulling me toward a tall man with kind eyes and an easy smile. "James, this is my brother Darren that I've told you so much about." James extended his hand warmly. "I've been looking forward to meeting you. Abigail talks about you all the time." This surprised me, the idea that I had remained present in Abigail's thoughts and conversations despite our estrangement. As dinner approached, I found myself seated between Abigail's college roommate and my mother's sister, Aunt Patricia. Neither seemed aware of the family rift, making polite conversation about my work and life in Boston. The facade of normalcy was surreal, everyone acting as though the past 3 years of complete silence were simply a brief, unremarkable gap in family relations. My father made announcements and toasts without acknowledging anything unusual about my presence. My mother fluttered between guests, the perfect hostess, occasionally glancing my way with an expression that clearly communicated her expectation that I maintain the charade. Throughout dinner, conversation around me focused exclusively on Abigail and James, their courtship, their plans for a honeymoon in Tuscany, James's promising career at a Manhattan investment firm. When asked directly about my life, I answered truthfully but briefly, noting the subtle tension that arose whenever I mentioned our house or my husband, plural pronouns and relationship terms, that made my mother wince slightly each time. During a toast from James's father, celebrating the joining of the 2 families, my mother leaned over and whispered, "Isn't it wonderful to see a proper marriage being celebrated, the union of a man and woman as it should be?" I said nothing, merely sipping my champagne, refusing to be baited into conflict. As the evening progressed, I noticed several of my extended family members watching me curiously. Second cousins. I'd rarely seen, even before the estrangement, my father's brother, Uncle Robert, who had always been somewhat more progressive than my parents. During a brief lull in the carefully orchestrated proceedings, my mother made several pointed comments about traditional values and proper families that were clearly directed at me, though never explicitly stated. I maintained my composure, focusing on my genuine happiness for Abigail rather than my anger at our parents. James seemed like a good man, and there was a new independence in my sister that I found encouraging. Perhaps she too was finding her way out from under our parents' rigid expectations. After dinner, as guests mingled on the patio where string lights created a warm glow against the darkening sky, I noticed my mother watching me from across the space. The champagne in her hand, likely not her first, seemed to have emboldened her. She made her way toward me, social smile firmly in place. "Walk with me a moment, Darren," she said, linking her arm through mine in a show of maternal affection that felt foreign after so many years of emotional distance. She guided me to a quiet corner of the garden, away from other guests. "You're looking well," she offered, eyes assessing my appearance. "Boston must agree with you. Your firm is doing well." "Very well," I replied cautiously. We won the National Design Award last year for our work on the Harbor Point development. That's nice, she said with the same dismissive tone she'd always used for my achievements. I saw in Architectural Digest that Thomas Hendrick's firm won the international prize. Wasn't he in your class at MIT? The familiar sting of her backhanded compliment, acknowledging my success only to immediately compare it unfavorably to someone else's, was so predictable it was almost comical now. The difference was that it no longer had the power to wound me deeply. Thomas does excellent work, I said simply. We have different aesthetic approaches. She nodded absently, then gestured toward the party. Isn't this lovely Abigail has always known exactly what she wanted? The wedding tomorrow will be absolutely perfect. The church flowers alone cost more than most people's entire ceremonies. She sighed contentedly, then fixed me with a look that was half challenge, half curiosity. Your sister's wedding will be perfect, she said, an undeniable beam of pride in her expression. Then came the question delivered with practiced casualness that couldn't quite mask its barbed intent. When will it be your turn, Darren? To have a proper wedding, I mean. With a lovely bride like James has found in Abigail. Something calm and clear crystallized within me. This moment, this exact moment, was why I had come. Not for reconciliation, which now seemed an impossible fantasy, but for truth. For standing firmly in who I truly was without apology or shame. I met her gaze directly, my voice quiet but steady. It already happened. 3 years ago. You just weren't there. The words landed with physical force. My mother's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips, her eyes widening. Behind us, I realized several nearby conversations had stopped abruptly. My father, who had apparently been approaching, halted mid-stride. The entire corner of the garden seemed to crystallize in silence. What did you say? My mother finally managed her voice, barely audible. I said my wedding already happened. I repeated louder now, not shouting, but clear enough that there could be no misunderstanding. 3 years ago, October 12th, at the Bowditch Modern Museum in Boston, you and Dad chose not to attend when I invited you. Marcus and I have been married for 3 years now. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother's face drained of color. My father's expression darkened as he closed the distance between us with purposeful strides. From the corner of my eye, I saw Abigail moving toward us as well, alarm, evident in her quickened pace. The confrontation I had both feared, and perhaps unconsciously sought, had finally arrived, and strangely I felt nothing but calm readiness to face whatever came next. My mother recovered her composure first, her shocked expression quickly replaced by one of cold anger. This is hardly the time or place for your provocations, Darren, she hissed, glancing anxiously at the guests who were pretending not to notice the tension, but were clearly listening intently. My father reached us, his face flushed with barely controlled rage. You've gone too far, he said in the low, dangerous tone I remembered from childhood scoldings. You've deliberately chosen to ruin Abigail's moment. Is that why you came? To cause a scene? Before I could respond, Abigail stepped between us, her back to our parents as she faced me. Darren, I'm so sorry, she said loud enough for them to hear. I didn't know they never acknowledged your wedding. That's unforgivable. She turned to our parents, something new in her posture. A straightness to her spine, a lift of her chin that I'd never seen when she addressed them. Is this true? Darren invited you to his wedding and you refused to go? Abigail, our mother began placatingly. This is hardly the time. It is exactly the time, my sister interrupted with surprising firmness. I've spent my entire life watching you two favor me over Darren, dismiss his accomplishments, and minimize his feelings. I accepted it because it was easier than questioning it. But this, refusing to attend his wedding, that's beyond favoritism, that's cruelty. My father's expression hardened. Your brother chose a lifestyle we cannot condone. We made that clear to him. He didn't choose anything, Abigail shot back. He fell in love, just like I fell in love with James. The only difference is the gender of the person he loves. The conversation had drawn attention now, with nearby guests openly watching the family drama unfold. James appeared at Abigail's side, placing a supportive hand on her back. My mother made a last, desperate attempt to salvage appearances. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion privately," she suggested with a tight smile directed at the onlookers. "No," I said firmly. "I've had enough privacy, enough secrets, enough pretending. For years I've been erased from this family because I didn't fit the narrative you wanted. I'm done with that." I pulled out my phone, opened my photo gallery and held it up. "This is my wedding day," I said, showing the screen to anyone close enough to see. "This is my husband, Marcus. This is the life and family I've built because you gave me no choice but to create my own." To my surprise, several relatives moved closer to look at the photos. My Aunt Rebecca, my mother's younger sister, peered at the screen with genuine interest. "You look so happy," she said softly. "I wish I had known. I would have been there." "Me too," added my cousin James. "Mom and Dad never mentioned you were getting married." My aunt looked at my mother reproachfully. "Barbara, you never said a word about Darren's wedding. All these years we thought he was just busy with his career in Boston. You deliberately kept this from the extended family, didn't you?" My mother's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. "It wasn't a proper wedding," she insisted. "We couldn't expect family to what Aunt Rebecca interrupted. "To support your son. To celebrate his happiness. That's exactly what family is supposed to do." My father attempted to reassert control. "This is our family's private business," he stated firmly. "And Darren has deliberately chosen to disrupt Abigail's celebration with his announcement." Actually, Abigail countered, "I think what's being disrupted is the fiction that we're a perfect, loving family. We're not. We never have been. And I'm tired of pretending." In that moment, something extraordinary happened. The carefully maintained Wilson family image, cultivated over decades of appearances and pretense, shattered completely. Relatives began speaking up, sharing their own observations of how I'd been treated differently throughout childhood. Cousins admitted they'd always wondered why I'd become so distant. Even James's parents expressed their shock at learning the circumstances. My Aunt Rebecca approached me privately, while others were debating. "I always suspected something like this," she admitted. "The way Barbara would change the subject whenever anyone asked about you. I should have reached out directly. I'm sorry, Darren." My cousin Lisa showed similar regret. "We thought you just didn't want to be around family anymore. No one told us you'd gotten married. I would have sent a gift attended if I could have." As more family members expressed similar sentiments, I felt a strange mix of vindication and grief, validation that the differential treatment hadn't been my imagination's sorrow for the relationships I might have had if not for my parents' control of the narrative. Throughout this revelation, my parents stood increasingly isolated, their authority and version of reality challenged for perhaps the first time. My mother eventually retreated inside the house, unable to maintain her composure. My father followed shortly after, citing the need to check on her. With their departure, the atmosphere shifted. Abigail approached me, tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Darren. I knew they treated you differently, but I never realized how far it went. Can you forgive me for being complicit all these years?" "There's nothing to forgive," I told her honestly. "We were both playing the roles they assigned us. You didn't create the dynamic." Still, she insisted I should have seen it clearly sooner. James helped me understand that our family wasn't normal. She glanced at her fiancé with obvious affection. "He asked questions about you, about why you weren't around, that made me really think for the first time." James stepped forward, extending his hand. "I've been wanting to meet you since Abigail and I started dating. She has all these childhood stories about her brilliant architect brother. I hope after tomorrow we can start building a real relationship, all of us." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. I shook his hand, feeling a tentative hope that perhaps one meaningful family connection might be salvaged from this evening. As the night wound down and guests began departing, I made my own quiet exit, declining Abigail's invitation to stay longer. The emotional toll of the confrontation had left me drained but strangely peaceful, as though a festering wound had finally been lanced. In the hotel room, Marcus waited up for me, concern evident in his expression as I entered. "How did it go?" he asked simply. I sank onto the edge of the bed. There was a confrontation, a big one. As I recounted the evening's events, His expression shifted from concern to outrage, to cautious hope, as I described Abigail's unexpected support and the extended family's reaction. "So what happens now?" he asked when I'd finished. "I don't know," I admitted, lying back on the bed, physically and emotionally exhausted. "Abigail still wants us at the wedding tomorrow. My parents." I shook my head. "I don't think anything changes there. But maybe with Abigail, with some of the extended family, something new could grow." That night, text messages began arriving from family members who had witnessed the confrontation. "My cousin Lisa. So good to reconnect tonight. Would love to visit you in Boston sometime. Aunt Rebecca, proud of you for speaking your truth. Let's not lose touch again. Even Abigail's future mother-in-law James and I were deeply moved by your courage tonight. You're always welcome in our home." Each message was a small affirmation, a thread of potential connection. As I showed them to Marcus, I felt something I hadn't expected from this weekend. Not just the closure I'd sought, but the possibility of new beginnings. The morning of Abigail's wedding dawned with unexpected clarity, both in the crisp autumn weather and in my own mind. After a night of reflection, I'd made my decision. Marcus and I would attend together, presenting ourselves as the married couple we were without apology or concealment. "Are you sure?" Marcus asked, as we dressed in our hotel room, adjusting his tie with practiced precision. "After everything that happened last night, it might be easier to go alone, or not go at all." "I'm sure," I replied, feeling a certainty I hadn't expected. "I've spent too many years hiding parts of myself to make others comfortable. I won't do it anymore, not even for one day." We arrived at St. Thomas Episcopal Church 45 minutes before the ceremony. The limestone Gothic Revival building stood imposing against the blue October sky, its stained glass windows catching the morning light. Guests in formal attire streamed up the steps, greeted by ushers distributing programs. Marcus squeezed my hand as we approached. "Ready?" I nodded, and we climbed the steps together, my wedding ring catching the sunlight, his presence beside me, both a statement and a source of strength. The reactions were immediately varied and revealing. Some guests, particularly the older generation of my parents' friends, visibly stiffened, exchanging glances or abruptly changing conversation directions as we passed. Others, especially those who had witnessed last night's confrontation, offered warm greetings, some going out of their way to introduce themselves to Marcus. My mother, stationed near the entrance in her role as mother of the bride, froze momentarily when she saw us. Her gaze flickered from my face to Marcus's, then to our clasped hands before she recovered her social veneer. "Darren," she acknowledged with a tight nod, deliberately not addressing Marcus. "The family section is in the front left." Her emphasis on family carried a clear implication that Marcus was not included in that designation. "Thank you," I replied evenly. "My husband and I will find our seats." Without waiting for her reaction, we moved past into the sanctuary. My father, deep in conversation with the minister near the altar, spotted us, but made no move to approach, his expression carefully neutral. We took seats in the family section, despite my mother's obvious intent to exclude Marcus. A few moments later, to my surprise, Aunt Rebecca and Uncle Stephen deliberately moved to sit beside us. "We're so glad you both came," Aunt Rebecca said warmly, reaching across to clasp Marcus's hand. "Stephen and I were just saying it's about time we got to meet the newest member of the family." That simple gesture of inclusion, so natural, so sincere, brought an unexpected lump to my throat. Uncle Stephen leaned over, speaking quietly. "Your mother doesn't speak for all of us, Darren. Never has, though she likes to think so." The ceremony itself was classically traditional, exactly what I would have expected from an event orchestrated by my mother. Abigail looked radiant as she processed down the aisle on my father's arm, her gaze finding mine briefly with a small, genuine smile as she passed our pew. Throughout the service, I found myself reflecting on the contrasts between this wedding and my own. The religious versus secular setting, the hundreds of guests versus our intimate gathering, the adherence to tradition versus our personalized ceremony. Not better or worse, simply different expressions of commitment. The reception at Westfield Country Club continued this theme of traditional elegance: crystal chandeliers, string quartet, multi-tiered cake and champagne fountain, As we entered the ballroom, I felt the weight of eyes tracking our movement, the subtle repositioning of conversations as people decided whether to acknowledge or avoid us. Abigail, however, made her position clear immediately. Breaking away from the receiving line, she hurried over with James in tow. "You came," she said, embracing me tightly before turning to Marcus with equal warmth. "And you must be Marcus. I've heard so much about you. All good things, I promise." "Congratulations," Marcus offered, shaking James's hand before being pulled into a surprise hug by Abigail. "I'm so sorry we missed your wedding," she said with genuine regret. "But I'm hoping this is the beginning of making up for lost time." That moment set the tone for much of the reception. While my parents maintained a careful distance, creating a choreography of avoidance that would have been comical if not so pointed, other family members seemed determined to make amends. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years sought us out, asking about our lives in Boston, our work, our home. Elderly relatives I'd expected to be scandalized instead asked thoughtful questions about our relationship and wedding. During the traditional dances, when the floor cleared for Abigail and my father followed by Abigail and James, I felt Marcus's hand slip into mine. "Dance with me," he asked simply when the floor opened to all guests. For a brief moment I hesitated, decades of conditioning making me consider who might be watching, what they might think. Then I looked into my husband's eyes and remembered the freedom I'd fought to claim. "I'd love to," I replied, leading him onto the dance floor. As we moved together among the other couples, I was acutely aware of my parents watching from their table, my mother's expression a study in conflicted emotions. But for perhaps the first time in my life, I found I didn't care about their approval. The man in my arms, the life we'd built together, was validation enough. Later, during a moment alone at our table, while Marcus chatted with my cousin's husband about structural engineering, my sister's new husband James approached and sat beside me. "I wanted to thank you," he said unexpectedly. "For what?" "For coming today, despite everything. For helping Abigail see some truths about your family dynamics that she needed to recognize before starting our marriage." He glanced toward where Abigail was laughing with friends. "She's different since reconnecting with you. More authentic, less concerned with meeting your parents' impossible standards. I think seeing you stand in your truth has helped her find her own." This perspective, that my estrangement and eventual confrontation had somehow benefited Abigail, had never occurred to me. It offered a new lens through which to view the painful journey of recent years. As the reception continued, I noticed my parents maintaining their careful distance, speaking with us only when social convention absolutely demanded it. My mother's interaction with Marcus was limited to a single cold hello when directly introduced by Abigail. My father managed slightly better, asking one question about Marcus's engineering work before finding an excuse to move on. Their rejection still stung, but the pain was dulled by the contrasting warmth from others. When it came time for our goodbyes, Abigail held me tightly. "This isn't an ending," she promised. "James and I will visit you in Boston after the honeymoon. I want to see your home, meet your friends, be part of your life again." "I'd like that," I replied, surprised to find I meant it completely. The drive back to Boston with Marcus that evening felt like emerging from a long tunnel into open air. We processed the weekend's events, the unexpected allies, the persistent rejection from my parents, the promise of a renewed relationship with Abigail. "How are you feeling?" Marcus asked, as the city skyline came into view, our home waiting beyond. "Lighter," I realized. Not completely healed, but lighter. 6 months passed, bringing significant changes. True to her word, Abigail and James visited us in Boston, spending a weekend exploring our neighborhood, meeting our friends' genuine interest in our lives, evident in their questions and observations. We showed them our favorite restaurants, the architectural landmarks that inspired us, the community we'd built in my parents' absence. "I get it now," Abigail said our last night together, sitting in our living room with glasses of wine. "Why you love it here. It's not just the city. It's the life you've created, the freedom to be fully yourselves." This visit led to regular communication, weekly calls, shared holiday plans, a slowly rebuilding sibling relationship based on adult mutual respect rather than childhood dynamics. Through Abigail, a cautious reconnection with some extended family developed as well. Aunt Rebecca and Uncle Stephen visited during their anniversary trip to New England. Cousins reached out on social media, sharing life updates and expressing interest in mine. My parents remained the unchanging element in this shifting family landscape. They maintained minimal contact, acknowledging birthdays and major holidays with formal cards signed mother and father, rather than their names containing no personal messages. When we sent them photos of our recently completed architectural project, a community arts center that had received national recognition, the envelope was returned unopened, a painful echo of the wedding album years earlier. "I think this is who they are," I told Marcus after that particular rejection. "They can't change because they can't acknowledge that their worldview might be limited or flawed." "Are you okay with that?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. I considered the question carefully before answering. "I'm not happy about it. I'll always wish for parents who could love me unconditionally, but I've stopped expecting them to become different people. That's its own kind of freedom." This acceptance, neither bitter nor resigned, simply realistic, marked a significant milestone in my healing journey. The understanding that my worth wasn't dependent on my parents' validation, that family could be created rather than merely inherited, allowed me to focus on building connections that nourished rather than diminished me. Perhaps the most profound development came later that year when Marcus and I began the process of adopting a child, creating our own family legacy based on acceptance rather than conditioned love, rather than expectation. "Do you think they'll want to be grandparents?" Marcus asked as we completed preliminary paperwork. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But our child will have grandparents in your parents' chosen family and our friends, and at least one aunt and uncle in Abigail and James. That's more than enough love to grow up with." Looking back now, on that moment at Abigail's wedding when I finally spoke my truth aloud, it already happened. You just weren't there. I recognize it as the pivotal point where I stopped seeking external validation and fully claimed my own life narrative. Family isn't always who raises you. Sometimes it's who sees you for who you truly are, who celebrates rather than merely tolerates your authentic self, who creates space for you to grow rather than a box for you to fit within. The family I've built with Marcus, with friends who became chosen siblings with his parents, who welcomed me as a son with my sister, who found her way back to genuine connection. This is the legacy I choose to nurture and expand. Have you ever had to create boundaries with family to protect your own well-being? What helped you find peace with difficult family relationships? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If my story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more journeys of finding authenticity despite family expectations. Remember, sometimes the most powerful act of self-love is acknowledging that while we can't choose our birth family, we can absolutely choose who gets to be part of our life story. Thank you for listening. And until next time, be true to who you are. It's the only path to genuine happiness.